first thing I want to talk about is the emotion behind eating, and I'm sure most of you already know this, but obviously in aged care or in disability or in other sectors, when we're working with the kitchens at trying to just meet compliance, it's really hard to consider the emotive aspects of eating when you're just fighting to get a puree to look like a puree. So this is just a reminder, which I like to have for myself. So it's highly social, it's highly emotional. We facilitate emotional connections. We form, we form friendships. We create people that we're going to be with for life, and we learn to care with each other over food, and it's really important, and it's so easily lost. Another reminder. Now, the 5 senses, I won't ask you what they are because they're up there, but how frequently do you think about the 5 senses when you're recommending a modified diet and fluid? I will answer because it's not often. I don't often think about how the person's going to smell a puree when I'm thinking about their aspiration risk. But it's worth considering, because if you do begin to entertain the idea of the senses in what you're recommending and how you're recommending the food is delivered, you'll actually find that the compliance and the enjoyment will just go straight through the roof if you really just focus on what you're doing. But my question is, if you're aged, if you have a disability, if you have dementia, what happens to your senses? I have some figures to dazzle you. So, chloride salts, amino acids, and sweeteners, the taste thresholds as we age is 2.5 to 5 times higher for the elderly. It's even higher for those with dementia, it's even higher for those with disability, and it just keeps going up. So do keep that in mind. Don't panic if you see someone adding lots of salt, but what it means is you need to re-season all the food. And I'll get to that a bit more later, but season. Grape, cherry, and lemon, it's 11 times higher for those tastes. If you're doing a sour bolus, just remember, if it's sour for you, if you're doing it in the elderly or someone with dementia, their threshold's 11 times higher, so you need to calculate that into your measurements of what you're doing. If you're not screwing up your face with a sour bolus, it's not sour enough to even have an effect on them. Okay, so the relationship between disability and dementia, obviously there's a high incidence. More than 75% of people with Down syndrome, aged 65 and older, have Alzheimer's disease. Now, something I don't know if that's referring to dementia as the umbrella term or Alzheimer's, because a few organisations use the word Alzheimer's where we would say dementia to make it an international term, because America uses Alzheimer's instead. So don't quote me on that. It's a lot. There's a lot of overlap. So the reason I'm here is because I do a lot of work in dementia, and you can basically take the strategies and use them for those with disabilities as well. I've worked in disability years ago, and I learnt half of these while I was in disability, so you probably already know a lot of them. Oh, and this was just an interesting tidbit for you. If dementia were a country, it would have the world's 18th largest economy. So it's a really big thing, it's getting bigger, and we all really need to push for considerations of our role and how we can all work together at bettering quality of life. So from now on, I'll kind of talk about dementia, but I just want to identify the strong relationship and try and just draw the parallels about what you can do, just copy-paste into disability. All right, now the first thing I want to say is this is a broad figure. Between 45% and 80% of people with dementia have dysphagia. I know it's really broad, and I'm sure a lot of you would agree that I lean more towards the 80% than the 45%. I've not really ever seen a site that only has less than half of the people with dysphagia. Now, something that is good to know is the type of dysphagia that someone with dementia will present with is going to depend a little bit upon their diagnosis of dementia. So what type of dementia they have, sorry. So vascular dementia, you're often going to see poorer chewing and coordination of the mastication. Alzheimer's, you might see more of a trend with forgetting to eat, forgetting to chew, poor pharyngeal clearance, and forgetting to swallow. And then frontotemporal dementia, you often get an increase in appetite, increase in the bite size, which is really going to affect what strategies you're recommending. change in food preferences, and eating of inedible items. So knowing the diagnosis is really important because it can actually go into your recommendations, knowing what trends a person might show. Obviously, it's not hard and fast, but just keep them at the back of your mind. All right, now again, these are things you all will have seen just written down on paper. People with dementia will show you dysphagia in a different way. Just because they're showing a different type of dysphagia doesn't mean they also don't have oropharyngeal dysphagia. So try not to focus too much on a behaviour. Do your first swallowing assessment and then step back and look at the rest of the mealtime environment, just like you would do in disability as well. So I've just written a list there of the common characteristics that you might see. Can you hear me if I face this way still? Yeah, okay. So you might see a bit of spitting out bits of food, holding food in your mouth, trouble chewing, all those things I just said about the different dementia subtypes. Not sensing the food in the mouth, and obviously overt signs of dysphagia. So think about the symptom that you've got and then bring into play the senses that you're working with. If someone's not sensing the food in their mouth and they've already got a sour threshold 11 times higher just because they're elderly, there's a lot that you need to work on there. But there's also a lot of room for improvement for them. I just thought I'd hit it home that the key message here is working with behaviours, not against them, and I'm sure you guys already know that. And often a key message I get asked is if I can stop someone from spitting or if I can stop them from holding food in their mouth, and the answer is no, I can't stop them doing that. That's what their disease is causing, but we need to work with it and adapt ourselves to it and our feeding to it rather than trying to remove a behaviour completely. Now, I like tables. I like some take-home messages, so I've put everything in a table for you. Now, I haven't written the references here. I do have references for these, but I'm sure you all know that these work anyway. But if you ask for references, I will send them. Okay, so if you've got someone spitting food, give them a napkin. Like if they're going to spit, let them spit. Make it appropriate. Holding food in the mouth, so offering sips of drink between the food just to give a bit of a fluid wash. Getting someone to swallow for a second time. Obviously, if they can't swallow on cue, that's not going to be as easy. Using smaller cutlery is a really basic, straightforward thing. I don't know if you guys have seen them a lot, but you know those, I love adaptive equipment. You know the adaptive spoons, like built-up cutlery. Have you seen the size of the spoon? It's bigger than a dessert spoon. And if you've got someone with frontotemporal dementia who's going to hoard everything into their mouth and they need an adaptive spoon, are we going to be happy with that? We could just change the spoon. Keep the handle, grab your OT and just get the maintenance person to somehow make some kind of device. Make it smaller. Maintenance are really helpful. Just as an aside, I needed reading frames and we cut up a display folder and maintenance took them away and made these little reading frames and gave them back. They'll do whatever you ask and they're really good at it. Don't forget. Okay, I love giving food in smaller, more frequent portions. It's really great for the esophagus. If they've got some achalasia, they're going to have tertiary contractions if they're 90 years old. That's just the case. Is everyone au fait with tertiary contractions? I'll demonstrate. You want your esophagus to do a lot of this, and it's just doing this. So you're going to get a lot of esophageal holdup. You might get some retrograde movement of the bolus, and if you're eating a full-size meal and it's not going down the esophagus, where's the food going to go? It's just going to keep building up and up to your upper esophageal sphincter. So instead of having morning tea be a biscuit and a cup of tea, beef up your morning tea. So make morning tea some yogurt, and that's protein, let me think, protein, dairy, maybe some carbohydrates and some veggies somehow in there, and I'll get to that in a minute. But do give more frequent, smaller portions. That's often a really emotional thing for the family to detach from, because often you're used to the family meals, breakfast, lunch and dinner, and it's really hard to convince them that you need to change the regime. But lean on your dietitians. If they need to draw up a table of nutritional intake per meal, then that's what it has to be, but it makes a huge difference. And you'll see their nutrition will skyrocket because they're suddenly getting a lot more food. I'm very fortunate that I share an office with a dietitian, and I've always worked closely with them, and I know we don't all have that benefit. But if you have questions, you can email me and I'll try and help. And the usual ones, I'm going to move faster. Alternating between food and fluids. And I do love alternating between cold foods and hot foods. I know we all eat our savoury and then our sweet at the end. There is a lot to be said for stimulating the senses by going between hot, cold, sweet, sour. So just keep that in mind. If you can't do textures because they're on puree, change the tastes. Have something spicy and something lemony. And a second table. Another thing I love is finger food. I just love finger food. I think it's fabulous. I'm aware that dietitians don't love it because it's tricky to occupy all of the food groups in finger food, but we have a solution. We wrote a book, and I'll show it to you. There are recipes that you can use to make finger food an acceptable meal 6 times a day. Pictorial menus, which is great. Obviously, we want to enable choice. We want people to choose what they're going to eat. We want people to be able to partake in the whole process, and often they're not. I had a man with aphasia on my ward who wasn't eating. He lost 8 kilos. All he needed was someone to sit down, read him the menu, and choose his meals, and now he's put on 5 kilos because he's suddenly having choice and knowing what food he's getting. Like, it's so simple. I understand that making pictorial menus is a massive deal. I don't have them. If anyone has them, I would love to know because it's really hard, but they're a great idea. Matching the food to the music. This is an interesting one. If you're serving pasta, play Italian food. You'll actually encourage eating. Playing classical music over meals actually improves nutrition. Obviously, you need to take into play if the person has a disability. Obviously, if it's going to be too distracting, then you need to choose what you're doing carefully, but it is something to think about. Something we do with people not being interested in food in Hammond Care in the cottage model, which is where it's a bit like group homes, where the carers in the cottage and, say, 5 people live in that place together. They're down in our southern regions, but the kitchen is the centre of the cottage, if you can imagine, right in the middle with like wings down the side where the bedrooms are. Kitchen's right here, and in the afternoon when it's time to start preparing dinner, all of the residents are in the same area, so they smell the food, they see it, and even if I have pre-peeled potatoes to make mashed potato because I have no time, the carers actually get an unpeeled potato and put it on the bench with a potato peeler so that Joe Bloggs can come up and actually peel the potato. And it's just it's a really easy fix, and again, not easy, but does make a difference. And I'll skip a couple, but one of my very, very favourites is a liquid puree diet, recently added to the IDSI, so I'm sure you all know about it. Again, Lisa and I used this many years ago for someone, and it worked, and I've been using it ever since. It's one of my favourites. For those is everyone familiar with liquid puree or homogenized? Okay, so think of it as just a food smoothie. It's your meal in a cup. So you get the soup, the pureed protein, the pureed carbohydrate, and the pureed vegetables, put them all together and blend. Just so you know, you need a ratio of about 2.5 liquid to 1 solid. If you aren't getting it at your site or in the cottage or wherever you want it, get in the kitchen and do it with them, because that's the only way I've gotten it at my site. I've written them a recipe on some rubbish piece of paper. But get in the kitchen, and it's worth trying, and it tastes fine. I had pulled pork the other day in a homogenized meal. Delicious.